The self-checkout screen froze. A red alert blared. Seconds later, a decorated war hero was surrounded by store employees accusing him of fraud, while a Secret Service agent quietly watched from the frozen foods aisle. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Danielle's tone carried the practiced sharpness of someone who had grown used to minor power, wielded often and indiscriminately. She didn't look at him, only at her tablet, then back toward the store manager, standing near the service desk. They exchanged a nod. James wasn't just confused now. He was calculating, scanning her posture, her choice of words, the temperature of the room, like he used to scan jungles for movement. He had walked through ambushes with less tension in the air. "I served this country longer than you've been alive," he said, his voice even but tight. "All I did was scan my food." Danielle's eyes flicked up. There was no recognition in them, no pause, no respect. "That's irrelevant, sir. Step aside." He did, slowly, methodically, the way he would dismount from a helicopter under fire. Not because he was guilty, but because he'd learned long ago that escalation starts with a twitch. And escalations ruin lives. But the whispering had already begun. A teen with earbuds mouthed something to his girlfriend. A balding man with a cart full of soda watched with open suspicion. James felt the weight of it settle around his shoulders heavier than his old rucksack ever did. The silence between the beeps and accusations grew louder. Danielle pulled his basket toward her, re-scanned the items, then frowned at the screen. "Looks like you doubled an item," she said. "Canned soup. That's enough to trigger it." "I scanned everything once. You can look at the footage," James said, trying to keep his jaw from locking. "Or just use your eyes." Danielle's reply was colder this time. "I don't need to review footage. I have policy." And that was the difference, wasn't it? In James's world, there had been trust, bonds formed in firefights, men who put their lives in your hands without hesitation. Here, it was policy, company codes, someone half his age with a name tag and a clipboard treating him like a criminal over 50 cents of chicken noodle. The store manager finally walked over. His name tag read Chad. His face was red from the heat, or maybe from embarrassment, but his voice was neutral and clipped. "Is there a problem here?" Danielle jumped in before James could answer. "Potential fraud at Kiosk 4. He got flagged and wouldn't step away." "I complied," James said quietly. "I was waiting for help. This is a misunderstanding." Chad glanced at the screen, frowned. "Let's just run it through a regular register and get you on your way." But the damage was already done. James heard the word fraud bounce from one aisle to the next like shrapnel. He saw the cashier at the far register staring. He watched a kid whisper to his mother, and the mother gently steer him away, as though proximity to a veteran accused of theft might be contagious. And that's when it hit him, deeper than insult. They didn't see a man who'd jumped from helicopters into napalm skies, who held dying friends while calling in medevac. They didn't see a bronze star. They didn't see anything at all. They just saw a tired old man in the wrong line. James didn't notice him at first. Years ago, he would have, his instincts honed to catch the tiniest break in rhythm. But age slows things, or perhaps pain dulls it. Either way, the man was there long before James realized he wasn't just another shopper. He stood near the freezer case, one hand on the cart, the other subtly touching his earpiece. His eyes didn't linger on the ice cream or the glass doors. They moved with purpose, tracking the growing tension by the front registers, watching Danielle's posture, watching the second employee's smirk, watching James's hands. Then he turned casually and walked toward the bakery section. Another man peeled off from aisle 6, close-cropped haircut, eyes like polished steel. A third followed from the pharmacy wall, moving so smoothly it almost looked like a glide. It was a triangle. They weren't cornering. They were assessing. James, meanwhile, had been left to stew in the widening circle of judgment. The words gift card scam had started floating in the air. He could feel them clinging to him like cigarette smoke. The woman at the flower stand looked away as he tried to meet her eyes. A man holding an energy drink scoffed under his breath. He looked down at the envelope in his hand. The ink was a little smudged where his palm had sweated through the paper. He remembered writing it the night before. He'd spent 20 minutes debating which card to buy, whether 9-year-olds still liked unicorns or if that was too babyish. Eventually he settled on a plain blue card with balloons. It didn't matter. It was the message that counted. To Emma, with love, Grandpa. And here it was, treated like contraband, like evidence. A lifetime ago, he'd learned to breathe through humiliation. It happened often in wartime. Young officers barking orders, bureaucrats losing paperwork, medals handed out by men who'd never fired a shot. But this quiet crucifixion in a grocery store, hurt in a different way. Not because it was louder, but because it was smaller, meaner, stripped of necessity. Danielle didn't see him clenching his fists behind the cart handle. She didn't see his right eye twitch, barely, but enough to betray the internal restraint required not to snap. But someone else did. One of the plainclothes men had moved close enough to hear everything. He was still browsing a shelf of energy bars, pretending to compare protein contents, but his eyes flicked to the screen Danielle held, then to James, then back to her. She hadn't noticed him. She was too busy tilting her head at the walkie-talkie, saying, "I don't care what he says. If the surveillance shows even one irregular motion around the kiosk, that's enough for asset verification. We had a fake vet last week, remember?" James heard it. Fake vet. The words didn't just sting, they burned. He didn't move, but inside, something shifted. Not rage, something colder, sharper. A line was being crossed, and across the store, the man in the dark polo finally tapped his earpiece and said 2 words: "Confirm identity." The clapping started awkwardly, scattered, hesitant, like a match struggling to catch in damp air. But once lit, it spread. One man in a mechanic's uniform stepped forward and clapped twice, loud, unflinching. Then a woman near the detergent aisle joined in, clutching her toddler to her chest. A senior with a Vietnam-era hat pulled it off and held it to his heart. Applause rolled in waves, not orchestrated, but honest, raw, and utterly human. James stood still, as if rooted to the tile. He wasn't used to applause. Combat veterans rarely are. He had been saluted by subordinates and handed medals in formality, but public affirmation, stripped of politics and pretense, was foreign ground. His knuckles tightened around the cart handle, the envelope for Emma still cradled between fingers calloused by time and conflict. Agent Morgan stood by his side, not imposing, not protective, just present. His expression was unreadable, professional, but his stance had shifted, no longer assessing threat, but honoring presence. He leaned slightly closer and said, low enough for only James to hear, "Sir, we saw everything. The scanner flagged your transaction because of a software update. It's been glitching all week. But what mattered wasn't the code. It was the people who decided to act on it." James nodded once, a short, deliberate gesture. He wasn't angry. He was something deeper, weathered. And this wasn't his first storm. The store manager was still talking, voice trembling with the weight of both embarrassment and liability. "Mr. Callahan, we had no idea. This is a terrible misunderstanding. Our staff made a judgment error. Training will be—" He faltered as James raised a hand, not aggressively, but with quiet finality. "It's not about me," James said. His voice wasn't raised, but the silence that followed made it feel louder than the intercom had minutes before. "It's about how quick we are to assume the worst. You have a system that scans for anomalies, and people who don't question when it gets it wrong." The air was thick, not with tension, but recognition. Nobody interrupted. Not the agents, not the customers, not even the corporate-looking woman who had rushed in during the last few minutes, clearly from headquarters. James turned, cart still half full, groceries forgotten. The balloon card now tucked back into the envelope. He placed it in his jacket pocket with the reverence of a soldier folding a flag. He didn't want apologies. He wanted reflection. Behind him, Danielle was no longer visible. She'd been ushered into the back by store security, her headset still hanging limp at her collar. The last thing James had heard her say before she vanished was, "I didn't know. He didn't look like a colonel." Exactly. He didn't look like someone who'd carried wounded friends through jungle mud or written final letters for those who didn't make it. He didn't look like the man who'd once been told, at 19, to hold the line alone until reinforcements came. He looked tired, like a grandpa buying a birthday card. That's the problem, James thought. Too many people wait for the story after the flag. They forget the story before it. Agent Morgan stepped forward. "Mr. Callahan," he said quietly but firmly, "would you allow us to escort you to your vehicle?" James hesitated, then gave the smallest of nods, not because he needed the protection, but because for once someone offered it not out of pity, but respect.